Hello and a very warm welcome back to the garden. I'm currently doing a big beetroot harvest and harvesting all sorts at the moment, and we've had a lot of windy weather. In fact, some people are saying that it's the windiest it's been in August for decades, and there hasn't been too much damage. The biggest thing has been the runner bean structure being blown over, but nothing that we can't mend. And recently I've done a video about how to get more out of your harvests, but today I wanted to make a video about how we managed to make this year the most productive year yet, and what I think are the 7 instrumental skills that have really contributed to that. The first skill is arguably the most important one, because it's all about soil and soil health. Because when you have a healthy soil, it does so much of the work for you. It helps control pest and disease issues, and also it provides vital organic matter for all of this soil life that is needed. And it really does, when you have a soil that is so full of life, it helps the plants uptake nutrients. And one of the easiest ways to improve soil health is to use a technique that I'm doing at the moment, which is just chop and drop, where you get your organic matter and you break it up into smaller pieces, and you kind of just spread it over the surface of the soil, and this will break down a lot quicker than if you put it directly into a compost bin, and provide that organic matter that's really going to help your soil life. There's also another really easy way to build soil health, and it's as you're clearing space. And what we want to do is remove all of the growth at the top, which you can of course chop and drop right there, but try and leave the roots in the ground wherever possible, because roots are the key food source for all of your microorganisms. And if there's always going to be roots in the ground, there's always going to be a food source for them. So you can do a kind of a double whammy, where as well as clearing and just leaving the roots underneath, you can then come back once it has been cleared and chop and drop all of this material back over the top, and that is the easiest way to build a healthy soil. One of the easiest ways to get bigger harvests from your garden, especially over the long term, is to make note of everything that goes well in the garden. So for example, you can write down the best performing varieties, particular planting dates that you found work better than others, also the spacings in between plants. Perhaps you find that growing them closer together ends up in providing more food. Also time-saving methods, things that you do that have perhaps shaved off 30 minutes that you can then invest somewhere else in the garden. And finally, those surprises where you think, oh, I've got to do that again. These kind of successes can then help guide you as you do your planting plan. For example, this year, parsley intercropped with runner beans did particularly well. And also these runner beans were planted 2 weeks after all of the others, but they've actually overtaken them and are providing the best crops for us. And I think the reason why is because we've grown them up this IBC tank, which acts as a heat storage. So I'm going to then add that to my notebook as something to do again next year, because of just how effective this is. If you really start to record all of these positive successes and things that you've noticed that have led to bigger yields, then over time your garden is naturally going to become more productive. And this really does link in with the observe and interact skill. And you can check out this video to find out a little bit more about how this works. Another simple skill that has been key over the last few seasons that involves a notepad is by creating impact lists, and these have been game-changing for me. An impact list is simply a to-do list, but of jobs that are going to create the biggest impact in terms of giving you the biggest yields and harvest and productivity. So every time I go up into the garden, I like to think about what are the key jobs that are going to give me the biggest returns over a set period of time. For example, for now, I'd avoid weeding. That isn't that much of an impact because I'd rather focus my time on transplanting the rest of the leeks, which are going to result in higher yields in comparison to doing a bit of weeding. One of the simplest skills that absolutely any gardener can do is multi-sowing, and it's been made popular by Charles Dowding, and it's popular for a reason because it is so effective. The thing that I love the most is the fact that you don't need to waste any seeds. You just plant them in individual modules, transplant them, and let the plants grow apart from each other. And what this means is that if you only have limited space, you can grow a lot of plants, and it's a highly productive way of being able to grow a lot of things. Also, it means that you can start plants and seedlings off indoors, and you can transplant them after you've taken out another crop, such as utilising succession planting. And there are 4 key crops that I like to multi-sow. The first are obviously beetroot, radish as well is super effective, and turnips, any kind of veg like that, including swede. And I also find that multi-sowing peas is also super effective. Polyculture inspired planting is another fantastic skill to really improve and boost the harvest, and has really helped this garden. The first thing about polyculture planting is that whole idea of diversity, which I covered in the pest control video, because if you have lots of different things growing, it's harder for pests or disease to take over, and as a result, you're going to lose less crops. But the other thing is that polyculture really makes use of the space. So rather than having just one crop, polyculture looks at the different levels and gaps in between. So around the sides I can grow things like radish and beetroot, and then you've got the different kind of layers and heights. So we've got the tall runner beans, and then we've got other, lower layers like the kale, and then underneath the runner beans we've got things like parsley. So rather than just having a few different crops, with polyculture and intercropping, we can use different space and different heights to our advantage to fit in more harvests. And without using polyculture, we'd just be missing out on opportunities to grow more food in the same space. The skill that I've been using a lot of, especially this year, and always gets me the most excited, is experimenting and not worrying about what the result is, so kind of throwing away the rule book and seeing what happens. I'll just give you a quick example here. This is a trombone squash, and it was this poor, sad looking thing, and I decided just to stick it in the corner of this raised bed to see what happens. Didn't expect much, but as you can see now, there are loads of fruits that have appeared, and it's looking really productive. So it's quite a shock. But had I not thought to put the squash at the corner of this bed, I might have really missed out on a lot of harvest here. And the second thing, just a quick side note, is that this has been grown in wood chips, and wood chip isn't really recommended as a mulch in the UK, mainly because of the slug issues. But it's worked really well this year and in other beds as well. So it's really good to know that. And again, this is just throwing away the rule book and testing for ourselves, because every single garden is slightly different, and some things might not work well in one position and work really well in a different position. Perhaps the biggest success from experimentation in this garden is just forgetting and throwing away the idea of crop rotation unless there is an issue like a soil-borne pest or a disease. The issue with crop rotation is that it's really limiting. So if you say grow one thing, you only have a limited number of plants that you can choose from to replace it. But if you forget about this, you actually have so much choice and flexibility. So for example, this bed was broad beans earlier this year, and the first thing that I've done is I planted more beans to follow them. And yes, I've got the leafy greens, which makes sense after broad beans, but I've also got things like beetroot and courgettes, which don't strictly follow the crop rotation of legumes. And had I not been following it, I wouldn't have been able to plant out these spare plants, and then I could have lost some productivity. The only way though for this to work well in terms of ignoring crop rotation is by focusing on soil health, and the tips in the first skill do that for you. And the final skill is a really simple one that you can just do year after year, and that's about adding some TLC to your raised beds towards the end of the growing season, ready for autumn and winter. So what I've done here is I've covered this raised bed with about 1 inch or 2, so 2 to 5 centimeters of compost, and then at the moment there's black plastic. Now I usually wouldn't recommend black plastic, but we're using it because we have this material available, but you can use cardboard or compost instead. I've actually done a video on Patreon about why I'm already starting to put beds to sleep for autumn and winter in August, which shows a little bit more detail behind my thinking of that, so you can check that out. And there's loads more videos on there as well of other parts of the gardening and the behind the scenes. But there are just so many benefits to covering your raised beds like this. The first thing is that you're adding the organic matter. The covering stops any weeds from growing through, which means when it comes to spring, all you need to do is remove the covering or remove the top, and it's ready to plant straight into, which is exactly what you need after you've been waiting all winter to start some gardening. This skill is kind of the foundation skill that keeps this whole garden maintained, and it is something that I absolutely do every year. And stay tuned for a video later on in autumn where I'll cover this in a lot more depth and detail. So there we have the 7 skills that I think have made the biggest impact on helping this garden to become more productive. And I'm just harvesting some green coriander seeds to dry and also to use fresh in cooking, which is also a result of experimentation and just letting things go. So I hope you found this useful, and I'd be really keen to find out if there's any skills that you have in particular that have really helped to influence your garden to make it more productive. I'd love to hear it down below in the comments, and I look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Goodbye.